My name is Sarah Bao, and I did my research on civil rights with a focus on brutality. So just to give a little bit of an overview, the civil rights movement was basically a human rights movement that took place from the years of 1954 to 1968, and it was a struggle for social justice. There was continued discrimination against blacks, and there was also violence and outbreak. So the violence and outbreak that took place was basically that blacks were realizing that they were being treated unjust and they weren't taking it anymore, so they were standing up for themselves. And the whites and those that discriminated against the black really weren't wanting to deal with the fact that the blacks were standing up for themselves. So violence basically came from both sides, and that led to even greater outbreak. And the first article that I read had to do with civil rights and police brutality. So the FBI failed to intervene in cases of police brutality, and this was basically just a case of federal irresponsibility on the FBI's part. Demonstrators were arrested while protesting discrimination, and blacks were basically denied things such as home loans and fair employment opportunities. And this led to them really just continuing and wanting to stand up for themselves because they realized that the discrimination that they were being shown was not fair, and there really was no, good reason for why they were being discriminated against. And they decided that it was time for them to have fair rights, and the FBI basically failed to intervene on every way possible, so that was their federal irresponsibility. The next article I read had to do with white rights workers, and they tell about the brutality that they witnessed. So there was one white civil rights worker who was struck with a pistol butt, and basically the police made no efforts. And while they didn't, it was basically the police made no efforts because of the fact that there was a white civil rights worker, and they didn't like that the whites were, integrating with the blacks, and they didn't want the whites to give off that kind of impression, so they just basically didn't make any effort to do anything and didn't make any effort to, arrest the guy or charge the guy that did hit with the pistol butt because they didn't want it to continue where there was integration. And Charlotte Thurber was part of 15 whites and blacks that went to the supermarket to demonstrate integration, and whites approached saying that they were going to clear the store entrance no matter what it took. And the blacks basically said, we don't want to deal with that, we're not going to put up with that. And there was a lot of beating and kicking, and there was just a lot of violence that took place that day from the whites to the black and white group of 15 that went to the supermarket. And the police were no help, they didn't care to help, they didn't really bother at all because, again, like I said, they didn't want to see that integration happening, and they didn't want to see it being demonstrated. The next article I read was about civil rights gains that were lost. Basically, there was a quote stated, "The gains made yesterday are vanished." So there were gains being made. However, on a day-to-day basis, you couldn't count that they were going to be there the next day because things were so up in the air and people did change their mind fast, as well as that it was so pressuring and you weren't really able to be open about something like integration and trying to help out those that were being discriminated against. So black unemployment actually rose and black income decreased. And for that to happen at the same time really just showed, not a very stable economy at all. And it was just a very tough time. While they were trying to fight for discrimination, they were also, having a really hard time with employment and income. And a quote that I read from Bond is, "America is affected by a great ill, and that ill is racism. The goal is to alter and eradicate it." And that kind of spoke a little bit strongly to me because of the fact that racism really is an illness. It's not something that is just and it's not fair, and these people are losing all these correct, rights that they should have, and they're losing them completely. And another quote is, "We must mount a serious struggle against the arrogant power that runs from the corporate boards out to the White House." So basically this was about, we must stand up for ourselves and we must show the White House that we do deserve these rights and, kind of make an impact on them because we know we're not going to get through to anyone else, so we should just go straight to the top. Also, Julian Bond criticized the youth because he believed that they really weren't helping as much as they could in this fight against discrimination. And then this quote in the corner up here on the right is, "For Black America, it is like climbing a molasses mountain in snowshoes, while the rest of the country takes a leisurely ride on a ski lift to the top." Basically, that just shows how much of a struggle it is and how hard it is for those that are stuck in this cycle of discrimination. The last article I read from the historical links was about Cairo. Basically, it's a city and it's a scene of violence and extreme prejudice, and it has been for many years. Nothing really was changing, and it was just a place where you knew that there was a lot of discrimination. And a quote that I read from John Joyner was, "The black youth has little or nothing to look forward to as they enter adulthood." And that kind of hit me hard because being at that age where I am entering into adulthood, part of adulthood and growing up, I realized there is so much for me to look forward to. It just kind of shows that back then when so much was going on with discrimination, there wasn't really anything to look forward to because you knew you weren't going to get fair and equal and just opportunities for yourself. And report shows that Cairo police do not try to cooperate with blacks, so basically blacks just get shut down right away. And there was also a report that a 19-year-old black soldier died in the jail cell, and there were reports saying that he hung himself with his t-shirt, but really there was no actual reported cause of death, probably because they didn't want it to get out what had happened. And also the 2 blacks on the police force testify to harassment from the white officers that they worked with. So there was only 2 blacks on the police force in Cairo, but the white ones that they did work with basically were harassing them. And then just something that's going on in America today is the police brutality and the police brutality that comes from racism. So I read a report that says black people are 3 times as likely to be killed by police officers in the United States. And that kind of hit hard hearing that because that is 3 times as likely. It's just a really large number when you think of death. That's just a lot of people, and all just because of something so simple as skin color. And a former police officer was actually acquitted for shooting a 32-year-old protester. And to see that being acquitted for me was something that was just, you can't acquit something, like I said again, based on skin color. That's something that should be taken very seriously. That is not. And some of the signs that were in the protest were Black Lives Matter or No Justice, No Peace. And a police officer killed a man after pulling him over for a broken taillight. To me, that really bothered me as well. All he was doing was pulling him over for a broken taillight, and basically this man got killed. And just a picture I included, it says, "We demand an end to police brutality now." I think it's a shame that we're still dealing with things like this in the United States, in the world at all, because racism has been going on for so long. And I think that this needs to come to an end soon, because it is something that has been going on for way too long. And it's a shame that we still have reports like this and things that are still happening in the news. And it's something that should just basically be done with by this point. And that's just my works cited.